So, boss, you had expressed an interest in talking about our 2 years together, which we'll do, but I have to start at the beginning. You've got such a compelling life story. I want to make sure everyone knows all about that. You were born poor in the segregated South. Everything stacked against you. Tell us what your life was like at the beginning.
Well, I'm not gonna, if I get too much into it, it sounds like a blues song, so. It's embarrassing to talk too much about it. But first of all, thank you all for inviting Judge Katsas and me here. Judge Katsas is very special to me. He and his wife, Simone. In fact, all my clerks are. I just spent a week at the University of Florida with Catherine Mazzell, who you just heard from, the clerk for both of us, and we had a blast. And I also got a chance to spend over an hour with Mary Wise, and gave her all my knowledge of volleyball. That was a delight. But no, it was, and seriously, it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And it sort of gives you a perspective when you get out of Washington, that your work is the impact or the effect of your work and how important it is. And seeing these young people who were so engaged and so interested in understanding. We were doing the religion clauses, which are, if you look at our jurisprudence, it's a morass. So, but even with that, they were engaged and excited about it. So to get back to your question, you know, I was blessed to have had the life that I've had. I have zero complaints. I was fortunate to be raised by the two greatest people ever, Myers and Christine Anderson. Things didn't start out, and that's the beauty of this country, that things can start out and not seem so great, but because this is the land of possibilities and opportunity, it gives us a fighting chance. And it doesn't always work out. My grandfather often said there was no guarantee, but you have a chance. And here we have a chance. We had an opportunity to be in Indonesia this summer. And you see those young kids. I saw lots of young kids on some of the more distant islands who lived the life that I grew up living, right at the edge, jumping in the water, just poverty. But unlike here, that was it for them. Their chances were significantly different from being in this country. So I think what I really, as bad as things looked, we always were told that we had a chance. And the roadmap, according to my grandfather, was what he was going to teach us. But the thing that we had no control over is the fact that we were blessed to have been born in this country and not in Indonesia, not in some of the countries where the possibilities are limited or the chance of you doing things are less than likely or perhaps improbable, if not impossible.
He instilled in you a great sense of discipline. There's a great line in your book in which you say when you moved in with him at, maybe 7 or so, he said, well, the damn party's over.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It didn't sound like there was much of a party, but tell us how it ended.
Well, he believed that. His view was that we lived in the tenements, and when we showed up, we had not spent much time. I had not gone to school very much. I wandered the streets. My brother wasn't in school yet. And his view was that wandering around was foolishness. So he did look at it. He was a big man, and his exact quote, and you're close, was the damn vacation is over. And we always, we wondered what was the vacation when you're living in a tenement. But he saw it as a vacation. He said from now on there will be manners and behavior and rules and regulations. And that's the way it was. And he was also clear, like the old days, you know, that there was the right way, the wrong way, and his way. And and there were other rules, like, you know, the teachers are always right. And that doesn't work today. That's the teachers are always wrong. But his warning was if you complained about the nuns, who he encouraged to use corporal punishment, if you complained about them, then that would mean that you got an additional punishment. And so you could imagine that was sort of had a chilling effect on complaint. But it was just, you know, I look back at my life, and there were challenges, but to have had those great people, that's and to have had those nuns and to have had the neighborhood. I was walking through my old neighborhood with a friend a few months ago, and I had not done that in years. I had slipped away from those who have security concerns, and because I should not be wandering through the neighborhood, but it was absolutely great. You feel like you've escaped. But I was telling my friend that it occurred to me that none of the people I knew in that neighborhood were functionally literate. And yet, they were the best people that I've known. They were the people who gave us the values. They were the people who believed in the possibilities of this country. They were the people who told us we had to get our education. And think of today, of all the negativity that's being fed people who have struggles, who are being told that you can't make it, who are being told that the whole world's against you. And my grandfather's view was that you look at the things that you could do. They gave us hope. They gave us a life of hope, even though you looked around and the evidence did not suggest hope. Why were they so hopeful? They were hopeful. He would always look for things, basic things, for which to be thankful. He would say, we had the little cheap porcelain table that we all remember from that generation, where if you dropped something, pieces would pop up and then there'd be a little black spot on it. But we would sit at that table and he would say, look at all we have to be grateful for. We have a roof over our head, we had food on the table, and we have clothes on our back. There were always those three things. And beyond that, he felt that the rest was bonus. You had your health, you had friends, you had a job. But today, think of the litany of the endless litany of complaints that we have. And I just think that they gave us something that was positive, that gave us that even under the extant circumstances that did not particularly look hopeful, they gave you this endless supply of hope and reasons for hope and possibilities that you could create that were there and that you could create for yourself.
And your early education came from the nuns, whom you've spoken about, probably at a time where a lot of folks like you weren't getting educated in the public schools. Was that the start of your now very deep religious faith?
I think I'm Catholic, but everybody around you was religious. Even the people who didn't go to church were religious. There was something deeply embedded that was an important part of our lives. My grandmother, who was a saint, Christine Anderson, was Baptist, Southern Baptist. My grandfather, who did not like a lot of preaching and staying in church a long time. He would say, boy, all that hooping and hollering, I'm not for that. So he became Catholic, and then he would say things to me, because we were captives on the oil truck when we delivered fuel oil, and in those days, kids could only be spoken to. You couldn't speak. You couldn't initiate a conversation. So he would say things like, boy, everything starts with the boy. Boy, if God knows everything, why do you have to stay in church more than an hour? So we had deep theological discussions too. And, you know, under my breath, because you did not say anything, you were a kid, I would say, if God knows everything, why go at all? But notice I said nothing.
So you began studying for the seminary. You went to seminary, began studying for the priesthood, and then changed course. You tell some anecdotes about hearing, being exposed to some ugly thoughts and statements directed your way. You became what you called in your book an angry black man. So tell us about those years. And
well, those years didn't last as long. I think wheels come off the wagon sometime. In the late 1960s, things were changing in the society, and it was easy to be angry. And I'm not justifying it. I'm just simply saying that was a part of life. And the race issue is a very sensitive issue. It's a core issue with me. One of the hard things about going to the University of Florida or going to the University of Georgia or LSU or some of these beautiful campuses now is that it reminds you of what you couldn't do. I remember making a trip with my wife right after you clerked to West Point, which I had dearly wanted to go to, but there was no way I was going to get an appointment to West Point. And it's one thing in theory to know that you couldn't go. It's another thing to see the reality of it, to see that beautiful campus overlooking the Hudson. It's to go to the University of Florida and see those beautiful live oak trees and azaleas and magnolia trees and know that you could not be there, or go to Athens. So I think what happened in the late 60s was the realization that no matter how well I did, there was this wall, and that my reaction was not a positive reaction. It was I was a kid, I was impetuous. So yes, I did become angry. I went off the rails a while. It caused additional problems, particularly with my grandfather, who had no tolerance for that, who felt he had not raised me that way, to be angry, to be bitter, to be negative. But you know, the good part of it was there was enough residual, there were enough residual lessons from my life that brought me back to stability. It's like a boat, a sailboat being pushed to one side, but coming back to right. And I think a part of that was what I had been taught. It was the faith that had been instilled in me. And I truly believe that I never totally got away from the belief that this was the country that you would forever have these possibilities in. So I think I found myself wrestling with that. I was almost at war with myself. So, but that ended in the 70s, and it began this sort of long journey to thinking through why this wonderful country, why this Constitution, and it raised a lot of questions. And what were you had this inconsistency. You had the race issue, which was at war with the ideal. And how do we reconcile these two? How do we reconcile, finally, the contradictions that we have allowed to happen throughout our history? So a lot of what you see, Governor DeSantis mentioned the Privileges or Immunities Clause. There's an opportunity to reconcile it in the 14th Amendment, but not when you start reading provisions out, not when you start pretending things aren't there, not when you start pretending we didn't actually have this history. You don't have to be obsessed with the negatives, but it's there, and we have an opportunity. We have an obligation, I think, when we see it. You believe the same thing. We've had these discussions. We have an obligation. The ideal is in this document. It's in the Declaration. It's in the written Constitution. And it's built in this culture for us to move the right direction. But if we don't, I think we allow other people to dominate the conversation in a negative way when we have the higher ground with this noble document.
So let's talk about the positive. The sailboat rights. You graduated from Yale Law School, graduated maybe around age 25, and in less than 20 years, you're on the Supreme Court of the United States. There were people when you were nominated who said, well, he doesn't have much experience. In fact, though...
I was one of those people.
Well, but you had worked in the private sector. You had worked in state government as an assistant attorney general for Jack Danforth. You had worked at the federal level in the legislative branch for Senator Danforth. You had run an executive agency in the executive branch, and you had served on the D.C. Circuit. Pretty amazing sequence of jobs. Do you have a favorite of all those?
Oh, favorite job would be working for the Attorney General in Missouri.
My next question, I wasn't sure about the answer to that one. I was pretty sure about the answer to the next one, which is, did you have a favorite boss? So
that would be Jack Danforth.
So tell us about Senator Danforth.
You know, the cat mentioned some things that were really, it's humbling to hear one of your kids talk about her time in a very difficult job. But the thing that I liked about Jack Danforth, remember, he and I were never really politically aligned. I was never really much into politics. He was just a good and decent man. He was a man who never asked us to do things that were unprincipled. That's what I learned from him. And remember, when I worked for him, I was still very cynical.
Right.
But you watch him, how he treated us, the things that he believed in, how positive he was, how he was optimistic about our country. Now, did you have to agree with him on how he was going to reach those things? No. But the things that I do remember as a politician, he never compromised our integrity. He never asked us to do anything wrong. So one of the things that I promised my law clerks each year, all 4 of them, is that when they leave the chambers, they will have clean hands, clean hearts, and clear consciences. And, you know, it's one of the beauty of sitting here with you and knowing that you clerked for me in 2 jobs, right, is to know that I can look you in the eye and we never have to lie to each other. We never have to pretend that we didn't do something underhanded, because we know we were always above board.
Let's talk about your becoming a judge. I've done some things that you've done. I've now gone on the D.C. Circuit. I was struck at the sort of magnitude and finality of making a lifetime commitment, a professional lifetime commitment. I did that at age 55. You did it at age 41. And it was a completely different job from being in the executive branch. So how did you decide that you wanted to be a judge and make that great leap of faith?
Well, I never really decided I wanted to be a judge, but I did, and this for some people will sound odd, but I wanted to be a priest. So you've already made a commitment to do something for life. That didn't work out. And I thought about later on, after I regained my balance, to go back into the seminary, but there was one problem. I had a wife, and I kind of like her a lot. So, but you know, seriously, I think that in the early 1980s, when I told you that I had changed courses, I have left that up to God to determine what He wants me to do and what He's calling me to do. I stopped making these long-term plans and tried to figure out, to be discerning, what does God want me to do? So that's how I wound up on the D.C. Circuit. And I thought He got me in a fix when I was nominated to the court, but He never got me in anything He didn't get me out of, and He got me out of that mess. But I truly, it may sound a little bit strange, but I never really thought that deeply about it. That my view is that if this is what God wants me to do, I'm being called to do, this is what I'm going to do. If He wants me, if I've been called to take an oath to do something, then I'm going to do it. It's not that complicated to me. I think think about this. You and I are not in the Middle East at 19 years old fighting for our lives. We've not been deployed. We're not in harm's way. And doing a job sitting in air condition for the rest of our lives is not the worst thing that could happen to us.
And during my clerkship, sitting in the very room that I now occupy as a judge, watching on television as American service members were making that commitment.
You know, I remember you being very agitated about that. But I remember you being very agitated about a lot of things.
I was young. I've calmed down now somewhat.
You know, so Judge Katz is unable to. He is who he is, and he's not a poker face person. So he would say things like, "There's something strange going on in one of the chambers. There's something really strange."
Yep. And there was.
Or he would, Judge Katz has also informed me that Justice Marshall had retired. Yep. And his arms were up. Justice Marshall is retired. And Judge Katz has also informed me when I thought I had dodged a bullet in being nominated to the Supreme Court. We were at work that's Sunday.
Sunday morning.
Judge, Kennebunkport's on the line. So let me give you a hint. If a place calls you, do not take the call.
You took the call.
I took and you see what happened to me. Yeah.
Worked out pretty well. So I struggled with questions about the D.C. Circuit year. I wish I could ask you about
Baker Hughes.
all the great cases we did, but the fact of the matter is you weren't there very long, and most of our cases were pretty boring.
They weren't. I thought those were important cases.
Okay. Do you have any particular memories of that court?
Nope.
Okay. Like Kat said, he's honest.
No, I love the D.C. Circuit. I loved you all. I loved going out, walking for our walks. I loved talking about the cases, learning the law in a different way instead of being a policymaker. I thought it was great, and I loved getting my furniture in that I never got to use.
Mine is being installed literally.
Well, be careful, you may get nominated.
Right now. No. I'm much too old for that. One of the most consequential things you might have done that year was a bit of career advice you gave someone. One of my good friends from that clerkship year had decided that he would go back to his hometown in New Jersey and go back to an old law firm and start a family and have a very conventional life. And a public interest opportunity popped up, and he was not really inclined to take it, but he hadn't definitively rejected it. He had spent some time in our chambers and gotten to know you a little bit, and he came in to ask you for some career advice. That person was Leonard Leo, and the public interest opportunity was to take a job at the Federalist Society. So, what did you tell Leonard?
You know, those were wonderful times. That's what, you talk about it. D.C. Circuit didn't last long, but just think of the lasting bonds we've made. And Leonard asked which job, and I asked him where was his heart, and he said with the Federalist Society. And I said, you should go do that. And he did. And look at the difference it's made.
And the rest is history.
Yeah. But Leonard also then became my first adopted clerk.
Right.
And of course, we have been family ever since, from the birth of all of his children to many, many times together, the christening, the baptisms, right. First communion. So he and Sally are a dear part of our lives, a dear part of yours, as is Simone. So it's just, Leonard has been very, very special.
Let's talk about October term 1991. Pretty tough year.
Yep, I didn't have really good law clerks that year.
That makes it even harder. Amazing to... I look back on what things were like the whole year, but really especially at the beginning. So justice was confirmed to the court. He was 43 years old. He was relatively new, even as a judge. He had been through a very ugly, draining confirmation process. Two of the four of us were new to the Supreme Court, and we didn't have the luxury of a summer to learn how to write pool memos. There were all of the accumulated cert work that you had to do. There was the finishing up of the D.C. Circuit work, which we couldn't do because you weren't around all summer. And we were trying to get the chambers stood up 2 weeks before the November sitting. How in the world did you make that work?
I think it's by the grace of God. And, you know, you were there. We put our heads down. And we did it. And it was as difficult as it is. Look how it's bonded us. And we learned a lot. We got through it. It was a brutal year. And I don't think we've had a year like that. But look at the foundation that we laid that year, the things that we thought about. And it wasn't an easy term. We had a lot more cases.
Right.
And some of them were very, very hard. That was a term of Hudson, of Fuchsia, of Casey.
Right.
And so you had, whether it was the cruel and unusual punishment clause or abortion, it was all there. And we had to learn on the fly. We didn't have systems. But, you know, I was 43. There was a lot more energy. We didn't sleep a whole lot.
Right. That's for sure.
You slept there. I know you did.
A few nights.
A few, yes. I mean, we had a lot of sleepless nights. But again, I just finished reading this year. When you have law clerks, you get to read a lot of different things. I just finished reading E.B. Sledge's book, The Old Breed. And we did nothing compared to what that kid did on Peleliu and Okinawa. You feel humbled when you read what we have required other people to do for us to be able to sit here in peace. I just wish that, you know, we do the Wreaths Across America each year. And when you see the young people who have lost their limbs and lost lives, the wounded warriors, any inconvenience that we have endured pales in comparison. When you see, you go up to Arlington and you see all those who've given the last full measure, or who are mortally wounded. I have done very little. And I think that year was tough, but not even close in comparison to what they have done.
That's a great point. I won't pretend that any of us judges who work in air-conditioned rooms and have personal protection and everything else that comes with the job are even in the same league as the men who wear the uniform. But as judges go, let's talk about what you did. Do you remember the first sitting?
No.
Well, I will tell you about it. So I can go into a lot of detail here, because Justice Blackmun saw fit to disclose all of the internal court confidences that would otherwise prevent me from talking about this.
Not Harry.
I have talked about this in smaller groups, and Jan Crawford has written very powerfully about this. But the justice's first sitting, coming into the court in the extraordinarily difficult, again, by judge standards, not by soldier standards, the extremely difficult circumstances he was in. He went into his first sitting. Would have been the easiest thing in the world for him to keep his head down, try to find his bearings, not make waves. He was the sole dissenting vote in not one, not two, but 3 cases. Dawson versus Delaware.
Well, that was the guy who... Yeah.
So that one...
The guy who claimed to be an altar boy?
That one came out...
The Aryan Brotherhood
8-1. So question presented is, guy's committed of capital murder. He tries to avoid the death penalty by putting on evidence about how he baked cookies or whatever. And the government tries to counter that evidence with competing evidence that he was a member of an Aryan Brotherhood prison gang. And the court, in its wisdom, struck the sentence, and you were the sole dissenter.
Oh.
Should we take a poll and like how many people thought you were right? That one came out 8-1. Hudson versus McMillian came out 7-2. You managed to pull Justice Scalia. That was the Eighth Amendment case for which the New York Times dubbed you the cruelest justice.
Youngest and the cruelest.
Youngest and cruel. Did you read that op-ed?
No, never did. But it sounds
but
like...
you knew what it said.
You know, I like that because it sounds like the young and the restless, yeah? Brought to you by Tide.
And the last one of those 8-1s was Fuchsia, which came out 5-4.
Oh,
you pulled Scalia, and you pulled the old chief, and you pulled Kennedy.
But that was still another loss.
Another loss. Yeah, like I said, it was a tough year.
I know, but look at the progress. No votes, 2 votes, 4 votes.
Right. Well, little by little.
That's the way you whittle away at it.
There were a lot of very ignorant and perhaps ill-meaning people who were saying that you must have just been mindlessly following Justice Scalia when the reality was, even from day one, that street ran both ways, and there were some very specific instances in which Justice Scalia was following you.
Well, we knew that. And you can't, you're a judge now, and people are going to say things, and you can't worry about that. I think what's important is we took an oath. We took an oath to God to do the job a certain way. And we cannot let noise from the cheap seats give you a hard time. It's irrelevant. I agree with Governor DeSantis that the background the background noise, the cognoscenti, the literati cannot be people who force you to say that 2 + 2 = 5. You have simply you have to hold your ground. And in terms of Justice Scalia, I think, first of all, I trusted him, and we were good for each other. In lots of cases, we looked out for each other, and we helped each other. We encouraged each other. And he would make fun of me because he would call me like solipsistic or something like that. But I liked it. He would make comments because he thought he was, that sometimes I would like set the outer edge, and he didn't want to go quite that far.
You were the bloodthirsty one, and he was the faint-hearted one.
Well, but I told him when I got to the court that I would help him to look like a moderate. And look what I've done for him.
And so you did. How long did it take you? It was a very, very tough year. Ended with Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Again, it's in the public record that your position was originally the majority position. Didn't work out that way. Very draining for a lot of people who went through that.
It was raining for you.
How, wasn't even my case.
But it was still draining for you.
It was a tough year. How long did it take for you to sort of get your bearings and feel like you were comfortable in the new role, that everything was firing on all cylinders the way you wanted it to?
You know, I don't know if you ever get there. I think every year you go in and you self-scout yourself, and you start all over again. But so I said to the chief when I first got to the court, Chief Justice Rehnquist, I like the old-timers. I love that court. I love talking to them. I love talking to Justice O'Connor. They were just wonderful people. So we would have lunch, and we're in that back room in the justice's dining room. And I said, you know, I'm young, and they have kids older than I am. And I said, Chief Justice, again, speaking to Chief Justice Rehnquist, I have no idea why I'm here. I can understand why you're here, understand why Sandra's here. What am I doing here? And Chief Justice Rehnquist, in his inimical way, says, Clarence, your first 5 years, you wonder how you got here. After that, you wonder how your colleagues got here. And you know,
was it true?
Let the record reflect that I refuse to answer. So we'll talk later. So Justice White, who was phenomenal, just a good man and very kind to me, Justice White said, yeah, it takes about 5 years to figure things out, but you really haven't arrived at the court until one of your opinion comes back to bite you. And I have been bitten. So, but it's just, no, I don't think you should ever feel like you're in a comfort zone. I think every day there are things to think about, to rethink, to ask yourself, is this right? To dig a little deeper, to peel the onion another layer. And I think if you become stale, I think you become a bad judge. I love having my law clerks. I love having another set. I love my old law clerks, our monthly lunches, everything, because each time we're digging fresh ground. We're turning the soil over. You know, we're thinking, looking at it from another direction, looking at it from another angle and with different light, and asking different questions. That's why it's important to have clerks who don't all come from the same pedigree, who don't all come from the same background, you know?
Harvard, Yale, Chicago, Florida.
No, we have others. Georgia, we have,
I know.
LSU, you know?
Let's talk about your judicial philosophy.
I don't know if I have one, though.
Well, you are the most consistent, principled, committed originalist in at least over a century. What's most amazing about that to me is this doesn't seem like something that really took any time to develop. You went on the court with a relatively short track record on the DC Circuit. None of our cases on the circuit court were, deep dives into first principles. And you get there and, right from the get-go, you are just hitting it out of the park. How did you come to that way of thinking and so quickly and so forcefully from the very beginning?
Well, first of all, let me just give some credit to you and your co-clerks, just that you all were just great and honest, and think of all the things that we got to talk about that year. And it would not have happened without you all. But I'd like to give early sort of antecedent credit to the great man, my grandfather. These were people who were disenfranchised. You disenfranchise people when you make stuff up, when you change the rules, when words don't mean things. I was in Waco, Texas, a few years ago, and a gentleman from the audience asked me about textualism and about originalism and what it meant. And I knew he wasn't a lawyer. He was in cowboy boots. It looked like he just came in off the range. And he's a very plain-spoken fellow. And I said to him, if you see a stop sign, what do you do? And he said, stop. I said, that makes you an originalist and a textualist. I truly think regular people are that way, that words have to mean things, right, that language has to communicate something, that it may get ambiguous or complicated at some level. But I think what we have done to regular people with all this sort of fancy footwork and double entendres and levels of generalities is to disenfranchise ordinary people. People like my grandparents. As my grandfather would say, son, that's a fast-talking fellow from New York. I think we are obligated, when we interpret the people's Constitution, to make sense of it and to be plain spoken. I don't think it's really that complicated to, yeah, of course, when you look at the Constitution, you look at certain words, you look at some of the common law, it can be a bit complicated. But I always think, you know, I met your parents.
Right.
They were bright people. But I think if we sit here and start playing word, and your father was a doctor. Right. But he started playing word games, we'd lose him in some of this legal mumbo jumbo. That's not right. He's a citizen. And I think we are obligated to not play these word games and to not pretend that we see something, that we're suddenly oracles. And they can't look at the word due process and see what that means, because in there, right in the corners and the crevices, it has a secret meaning that can only be accessed by a few of us in black robes. That's nonsense.
The governor mentioned stare decisis.
That's Latin.
You've written pretty aggressively.
Not really.
Well, let's take, for instance, the time you invited reconsideration of Calder versus Bull, decided in 1798. Pretty aggressive, I would think.
No, just careful. I mean, I don't think you should discriminate based on age.
All right, how about deference? I remember when I was clerking for you, the orthodox Federalist Society legal conservative view was pro-deference. We believed in judicial restraint. The icons of the movement were Ed Meese, Judge Bork, early Justice Scalia, who was the greatest champion of Chevron, and some of the voices we hear today from the other side of that, Don McGahn and Neil Gorsuch, they weren't around back then.
No, they're young guys.
One person who was expressing skepticism at the time was you.
Because I ran an agency. And why would you defer to an agency? Nobody elected.
Well, you ran it.
It never made sense to me, and when Chevron was decided, I was chairman of EEOC, my reaction was, wait a minute, this is a license to steal. And you're just saying, go find ambiguity and do whatever the heck you want to do. How does that fit? And so what I did then is I wanted then, that led to trying to figure out why this government, why 3 separate branches, why legislative, why judicial, why executive, why federalism, why enumerated powers. So we spent hours working on that. And if you let agencies slip around that, and there's no review, you're going to give the same treatment that you gave the royal courts. Oh, the royal courts, the king's guys found this, let's defer to them. You know, what have we become? What are we undoing? How do you have the liberty that's supposed to be protected by the structures? That's all I'm saying. And that's, I mean, you may have an answer to it, but I give Justice Scalia credit. He and I would have long conversations about it. He was a greater man than I think most people even know. He is, I would go to his, Justice Scalia was an honest man. We would sit and we would talk. And never once in 25 years would he say, absolutely not, this is what I think and that's the end of it. Never once. Never once did, they try to paint him as an ogre or something. Not once did I see that. Every time I sat with him, we sat as friends. We sat as people who trusted each other, even when we disagreed. And in time, look at his writings on Chevron. Look at his writings on deference. And there was so much more he was thinking about before his untimely death. He was a true friend. And so I don't think I think that each of us is fallible. And sometimes we look at things differently. But if you have people you trust, people whose word you trust, who happen to disagree, and that's one of the dangers, by the way, what's going on in the universities. When we were in the universities, you and I might disagree as students. We might vehemently disagree, but we disagreed as friends. We disagreed as colleagues. Sometimes we would lubricate our conversations with other items, a beer or something. But we would debate. And 10 years from now, at a reunion, we'd still be arguing as friends. Look at what we're doing today. You disagree with someone, it's animus, they're thisophobe or thatophobe.
Try to silence them.
And now I think they're about to silence the Federalist Society, as I hear. So I guess I can't come here. I may have to join.
Some of us are fighting back.
Yeah, well, I just think that we used to figure out ways to debate and to learn from each other and to sharpen each other. We did that with Justice Scalia. I've seen it on the court. And the sad thing for me is to see the failure to allow that to start and begin and to grow at the collegiate or level or even at the law schools where debate is being stifled. But anyway, my point is that I think what happens is we all changed. There are some opinions that I look at now that I said, it's sort of like my son, who's a great guy. He's the nicest guy you ever want to meet and a funny guy. So he calls me up one day out of the blue and he says, Dad, did you notice that when people do something really stupid, they first say, hold my beer. So I just, I don't know what Holma beer has to do with it. But, or they say, watch this. And, you know, I just think that, I don't know why I said that. I always think of, my son makes me laugh. The guy's a funny dude. But I just think sometimes we all do things and we all have a Holma beer moment. And later on, we look back at it and we say, what was I thinking? What was I thinking when I wrote that opinion? How could I have reached that conclusion? And if you have a friend who sits with you and whom you trust, you see it a little bit earlier and a little bit more clearly. Now, it isn't as poignant in the legal context or in the judicial context as it would be if we were like jumping off a cliff and doing something stupid like that. But it does happen. And I think we are all better when we learn how to listen to other people. But in any case, and with Chevron and as with other things, we all learn lessons. And we all, the beauty of being, and you see it where you are, the beauty is in debating and discussing and reading and thinking about these things.
I know we're over the hard break, and I'm sure no one minds, but let me just ask you one more thing, which is the movie. Have you seen it?
No.
It's called Created Equal. It's a wonderful movie. I have seen it. I highly recommend it to everyone. My question for you is, you had written the autobiography, My Grandfather's Son, very moving, personal book about your life story. So now, why do the movie? Why do or let others do the movie on top of that?
It was not my idea. My wife thought the people who care about me wanted it done because of the very successful propaganda, sort of libelous, slanderous propaganda that takes hold against all of us to one degree or another. And they thought that it would be a way to counter some of that so that at least you have the truth that's sitting there if people are interested in it. One of the things that, and I hope you don't confront it, but one of the things that has happened in the last almost 4 decades that I've been in public life is you watch people make a gargoyle of your life. They distort, they lie, they dissemble, they mischaracterize, and they turn you into someone you don't even know. You learn how to live with the discomfort or the awkwardness of a perception that has nothing to do with you, but maintaining the life, the real life that exists. It is, I think for some people it is more difficult than others, but people who care about you often tend to want you to respond to it. And I think it's more their idea than it is mine. I try to focus on just doing my work, but in the years the distortions actually started back in 1980, from 1980 on. And it's been a long journey, and I think some people just simply want it corrected. And I have no idea how someone who has never met me or knows nothing about me would ever know who I really am. So that's why I wrote the book. I actually wrote that in order to establish and vindicate my grandparents' effort and what my nuns did. They did so much. They have made it possible for me to be here, and it seems as though that was being desecrated.
The movie is 2 hours of Justice Thomas in his own voice, telling his life experiences, life lessons. It is spellbinding, just as our 40 minutes with the Justice have been spellbinding. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the great Clarence Thomas.